what your favorite decision story is, and I understand it's something around learning to ask yourself a daily question about how you treated people.
Literally, when I was walking out the door, I asked myself, did I treat everybody fairly and with respect? And that was my gut check. I recognized if I could say yes to those questions comfortably, I usually had people that didn't like me. I just, at a very early age, had to get comfortable with that's what leadership is about, the courage to make those hard decisions.
Today's guest is Sue Olson, a transformational leader in fractional CHRO at Red Thread Consulting, where she helps emerging growth companies build agile people and talent strategies with a people-first approach. Her clients include private and public companies across high-tech, biotech, cybersecurity, and venture capital.
What does human-centered leadership actually look like when everything is moving so fast and the stakes are so high?
Push as much as you can to take care of the people that are leaving, and then also that make sure the survivors understand too the thoughtfulness that you put into that motion of the layoff. The brochure that we give to people has to match what's happening in the company. For me, personally, that can feel a rub if I feel like the story I'm saying does not represent the story that's inside that they're going to opt into. When you're a leader, that's your first team, and then your second team is your function. And some people really struggle with that.
What have you learned over your career in terms of the balance between emotional gut instinct and clarity of more structured decision making?
What I continue to learn and develop is there's the objective business decisions that need to be made.
Welcome to Bet on People, a podcast where we explore the decisions behind human-centered leadership and why betting on people isn't just good for people, it's smart business. I'm Keegan Evans, executive coach and founder of Euda. My guest today is Sue Olson, a global human resources executive and fractional CHRO who works with CEOs and boards of directors across industries including high-tech, biotech, medical device, and venture capital. Through her firm Red Thread Consulting, Sue builds and leads agile people strategy and talent for emerging growth companies navigating their next phase. Sue, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Keegan, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So just to get us started, you've spent your career working with CEOs and boards at some really fast-moving companies. What does human-centered leadership actually look like when everything is moving so fast and stakes are so high?
I think I go back to when I originally started, and I had a really formidable CEO at that time. And it was in I always say the 20th century, not the 21st century. So things were a little bit different then. You
Surely.
almost have to dial it back. But, human-centric, that company was not necessarily fast-moving. It was a very difficult product that we were putting in space, putting in semiconductor as an OEM and medical devices. So it was, I would say maybe the complexity of it was the fast moving, but it took a while to get the product out the door. But that CEO, and I was the first HR leader there, was very grounded in, at the time, Hewlett and Packard guiding principles. And so to me, I worked with that organization for 10 years. So seeing those guiding principles, which were very simple, but also very complex, really was human-centric for me. I didn't know anything different. I was in a very formidable place in my career in my mid-20s.
Yeah. I really like how you drew out the recognition that fast moving doesn't necessarily mean move fast and break things in the software techniques. When we say fast moving, we're often talking about the stress and the stakes that are related to it. And in a semiconductor OEM pipeline, the stakes and complexity are so high because it does take so long. It's the large ship that still has to be there that takes forever to turn if there was an error. And so you've worked in a couple of different things. What is consistent about human-centered leadership as your philosophy across the different things that really came out of that original experience?
Yeah, I would say what came out of that was one, again, I was formidable, so I didn't know anything different at that time. And that organization is in Silicon Valley, manufacturing. And again, the industry was diode pump solid state lasers, and
Yeah.
that was disruptive at the time. I didn't know, I could not have articulated that at that time like I can now. And so we were literally hiring the best and brightest physicist out of Stanford. One of our board members had that department at Stanford. And then we were also hiring people that were on the line manufacturing. And this was all in one facility. So I saw a scale of what worked for one. The knowledge worker was not the same type of leadership that you needed for people that were, coming in to do very intricate manufacturing and a different skill set. And then we had the middle level of people supervising the lines or supervising the assemblers and technicians. So throughout the thread that went through all of that was treating people fairly and with respect. And just being very transparent. The CEO at the time, again, he was disrupting in ways that now I look and think, wow, that was so interesting. It was an open workspace. We didn't have offices, so I have never worked in an office because of that experience. And people always laugh. I always have a conference room that I can go into for meetings that are important, but I've
Yeah.
always been out with the people, I call it, so
Yeah.
that I can understand and keep that close touch to the people,
Yeah.
to be human centric with them, understand. I would say one of my principles very early on was seek to understand so then I could be understood. I think Covey's book was really big at that time. I'm a big
Certainly.
reader. So
Absolutely.
I had my own, I would say my own compass of how I wanted to lead, but also was being influenced like by the guiding principles of Hewlett and Packard because that's
Yeah.
what the CEO wanted to continue to shape the organization as I was the first HR leader.
Yeah.
Did that answer? Does that?
Oh, absolutely. As any good conversation, it sparks so many other insights and questions that we wouldn't have time to go down all the threads. One of the things I really want to draw on, though, is your one, what a formative experience and grounding in these. When we have experiences that reinforce what already is our positive instincts early on in life, I have found that is just such a fortunate place to be able to bring more good and more of positive effectiveness into the world. And so, and the crystal story that you have around, I've never worked in an office because especially in an HR role, in any leadership role, understanding the people and understanding what's going on in their lives and as a whole is such a powerful way to be effective.
Bob was the CEO, and I think that was so important to him, and he walked the talk of building trust. So he was truly a leader that walked around, and that was his leadership style. So again, I didn't know anything different. That was so comfortable for me. And so I walked around and I knew everyone. People don't like to call companies family, but we truly were. We were about during that time period. We grew up to about 150. We all knew each other, and we had
Yeah.
a lot of good camaraderie in the
Yeah.
in the organization as well
Yeah.
as staying aligned to the business. But
Yeah.
so again, it was just a very comfortable place for me to be at that time.
That's wonderful.
The other thing that I'm thinking about that was I'm sharing the human centric, but I also had to learn the business and I was young. And I have two brothers that are older than me. And at the time when I was at this company, my oldest brother worked at IBM as an engineer, and my other brother worked at Intel as an engineer. They always would challenge me. They kind of were suspect of HR.
Sure.
And but at the time, my one brother recommended for me to read the book The Goal,
Hmm.
which was
Yep.
really brought big insights into the complications
Absolutely.
of actually putting a product out into
Yep.
industry. So I think that really formed who I am as a leader too, very early on, understanding the leadership and then understanding the function of
Yeah.
HR. So I think
Yeah.
of those things as almost three different hats. And I
Absolutely.
still, yeah, and I could not have articulated that back in my 20s.
No,
But
no, no.
now I can say that was
Yeah.
really a great experience for me.
Something I didn't formally work in an HR organization until my early 40s, and something that I realized as you're saying this that that really jumped out from the first time that we met last year was you are an HR professional who does understand the priority of understanding the business and understands the relationship of HR in the service of the business. Whether it was in my time in the Marine Corps, whether it was my time in various tech companies, critical to success was understanding what the main objective was, what the organization was trying to do. The Marine Corps does this very effectively. We say every Marine is a rifleman, and if you're not the 18-year-old Lance Corporal standing on a street corner with a rifle, then you're supporting that person. Even in the Marine Corps, supporting agencies can forget that because we get swamped by our own things. I've seen the same thing in HR organizations where the worst example was an HR leader I once saw say, "This company's on a rocket ship to Mars, and HR is the captain." And I was like, "Nope." Life support system, maybe. But your clear appreciation of and the criticality to it's not just about professional excellence in the details and technicalities of human resources profession, but it's in service of and understanding what the purpose of the business is such a powerful force. And so I just thank you for articulating that.
Yeah, no problem. And I think that when you said that about the Marine Corps, what was so clear there is the clarity and the transparency. And I think I read this book later, but probably in about 2013 or 14, Patrick Lencioni's The Advantage. And he is very clear about when you're a leader, that's your first team.
Yeah.
And then your second team is your function.
Yeah.
And some people really struggle with that, but
Absolutely.
with any of my clients, because I come in at the leadership level, and then I might provide guidance to the HR team, I'm very clear about that. My first team is the folks that's sitting at the table. And I think that that is important in leadership is that people understand in businesses that you have to be aligned with those leaders before you can guide your function appropriately.
I couldn't think of a better segue. Let's talk about the journey that has brought you to that level of clarity and role function. As we do on Bet on People, we like to talk around three distinct stories. And so, first up, I'd love to hear some experiences you had from early in your career where you participated in or observed decisions that somewhat deprioritized the people, followed the more Machiavellian wisdom of it's all about the business.
Yeah, I think, and again, it's going to go back to that early time period. One that sticks out for me was this organization I was in. This was a second time founder, so CEO, and so he knew that he wanted to have a successor. And we all were aware of that. And if I look back on it, we weren't involved in the interview process. That's something I think wisdom would have come. I would have asked. But I was young. But so the successor came in from someone in industry, was looking for that step up. And so we all were aligned. And then I would say at about 3 months or so the former CEO who established the culture, established the fact that there was product market fit out there in different industries. He stepped aside and became chairman of the board, but was still on site.
Yep.
The new CEO came in about 3 months. It was clear that there was misalignment. And like anything, this new leader coming in will bring some of his colleagues from his previous organization, which often happens. Actually, as I moved in my career, you sometimes when that happens, you think, "Ooh, am I gonna have my job?" It was really different. It was a cultural situation.
Yeah.
And again, I'm very young at this time, and people were coming to me and providing their feedback, some complaints, and I still remember it. I went to Bob and I just said, "I'm not threatening at all, but these are our values. And with the new leader, we're misaligned, and this is making it really hard for me. I'm hearing people that are concerned in the business, who are complaining in the business. And for me personally, I always think about it. HR recruiting is at the top of the funnel. You're telling a story of why people should come to your organization. And that can feel for me personally, that can feel a rub if I feel like the story I'm saying does not represent the story that's inside that they're going to opt into. So I was at a real decision-making place, and I said, it's fine if this is the right leader for the future, but I will most likely be resigning. And he took that to his other co-founder, VP of engineering, but it was really equal to a CTO, very established person. The two co-founded this organization together, and he was supportive of having the CEO, the new one, transition out too, and then the board. So I saw someone come to the table and make a decision when the operations were getting misaligned and leadership and culture. And what happened because of that is there is tension because people did come over and aligned with him. It was hard.
Yeah.
And that CEO was not, in hindsight, was not expecting that. So feedback would have been better up front. And so it was not an easy transition off at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. Are there any more specific examples of some of the breakdown in the values and culture in that first 3 months that that you were seeing that led to both the challenges with the existing overall team and worry about business outcomes?
Yeah, so this was again, we were building things. So we had a whole inventory, manufacturing, all that good stuff. We had buyers, a lot of positions that you don't hear about, especially yeah, I shouldn't say that, but yeah, it was, we were not all knowledge workers. We were building. And so one of the people that were brought over was brought in and overseeing all of the three buyers that we did have. And, the buying was components for what we were building. And that's where the first, I would say, crack started to happen. So the person that was brought in aligned with the new CEO was doing some deals that did not feel ethical to the
Wow.
rest of the team
Yep.
and was going to suppliers that he had a good relationship with and was doing things that we had not done before. So
Gotcha.
that's when I started to hear the first, and I think as people saw some things, they got more confident coming forward and saying, "Boy, this just doesn't feel right. Is
Yeah.
this right?"
Yeah.
So I was originally a sounding board. It was that type of culture. It was a kind culture. It was kind of like, "I'm not sure this is right, but this is what I'm seeing."
Thank you for drawing that example out. You said earlier it was about culture, and anyone who's listened to this probably knows how central we at Euda find culture. Culture is what drives effectiveness, intentional culture, and recognizing that. But with culture, culture is not a linear badge of good; it's about fit. And so I also really appreciate how when you approached the founders, it wasn't this is all burning and broken. It was this is a different culture than I'm used to, than others are used to. There are friction points. If this is intentional, that's great, but this is just not the place for me, which I think has a lesson not just in leadership, but in anyone looking for organizational fit. And when that integrity between what they feel for themselves and what they feel in the organization isn't lining up.
Right.
I would be remiss if I didn't really appreciate how you talk about the HR is top of funnel for telling the story, and the integrity of the story matters. And we met at a summit literally called the New Employer Brand that talked about a brand of employers be extending all the way from initial awareness and recruiting all the way through how you handle exits, and that value of yours is so clear.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but it's a HR leader that I follow and love. I don't think I've met her in person, Katie Burke, and she was saying at one of the sessions during that charter event was she was saying one of her team members says the brochure that we give to people has to match what's happening in the company. And I that was such a great visual for me. So, it does. It holds you accountable to what your brochure is gonna be when you're recruiting,
Yeah,
does it look like that resort when they come into the company?
absolutely. Yeah. And that's and when you talked earlier about like the formative principles where trust is such a your first CEO emphasize trust. All the good organizations you've worked for and effective organizations are about trust. That's the key. Trust is broken very easily by the cognitive dissonance between projection and reality. And so keeping that alignment is so important.
Right.
I'd love to kind of now shift gears a little bit. At some point in your career, where's an example where from the word go, there was prioritizing people over maybe cutthroat traditional business outcomes?
Sure. And again, this one might be a little bit dicey because I think I'm usually in organizations that have a little bit of constraint. Interesting enough, there hasn't been like just a lot of excess cash. So
Yeah.
I've just built that discipline of tough operational excellence.
Yeah.
And so dial this forward. This is back probably in the late 2018-19s, and in an organization that we went through a change in CEO by the board. The new CEO coming in was formerly a COO, again, stepping up into CEO, and came in and literally he was brought in to turn things around. And however, very aggressive, very, I think, knew what he was doing pretty quickly, but listened. And within a short period of time, he came to me. I was leading the HR function, and he said, "We're going to need to do a reduction and we're going to need to close offices." We were global. And I said, "Okay." And we were probably in October when he said that. And I said, are we going to, do this in the new year? No, we're going to do this soon. And then he brought in that to the executive leadership. So we were all together on it. And I was getting feedback from some of the executives like, poor timing. This is going to be tough. So I listened to that, brought that comprehensively. I also had that same opinion. So it wasn't like I was hiding under. I went back to the CEO. I said, "This is really, a tough time. We're starting to go get close to the holidays and we're going to reduce by 20%." And he said, "Yep, we're going to go into the new year with this behind us."
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay." And so I aligned there. And I was able to because I also said, "Okay, if we're going to do this, here are some of the things that I think we need to think about." And one of them was we had flexible vacation, so nobody was accruing. So those are critical when you're, thinking about, in my mind. Again, now I'm putting on my functional hat of leading through and or a layoff. And I said, I would propose that we are more aggressive and break policy on our severance that we normally do because of this situation. People are not going to go out with you know, a, a vacation accrual balance. They're going to miss the holidays that they were planning for. Can we think about that? And can we be generous on, being giving a couple of months of pain for their COBRA? Because that's the biggest thing, so and can we also give outplacement? And so we modeled that into the executive leadership. We started to say, "Okay, we still have to come up with these reductions. However, this is what's gonna happen with the list, that it will be impacted." And that the CEO was really aligned with that. He was
Good.
really aligned with, we have to make tough operating decisions, and we're not gonna compromise on those. However, yes, we can think about ways to get through this with a human-centric. So I would say there was a little bit of a difference there because sometimes I've had leaders that are not flexible
Yeah.
and the outcome is not as well received. And then once we got the list, then we started to cascade the next layer, brought them in, and we spent a lot of time to make sure that everything was buttoned up before we brought the next layer in, and then we trained quite a bit because everybody was struggling with the timing of the decision. I mean, everybody was. However, that was not gonna be something that was gonna move. Right or wrong, I don't debate about that. We did it. It wasn't one that I
Yeah.
couldn't debate. He would have found someone else to
Yeah.
lead the organization through it. And it ultimately ended up okay. It's always hard. But yeah, it ultimately ended up okay. And I actually had two leaders come up to me afterwards and they said, And it was a fun environment, very aggressive. It was an ad tech, so
Oh,
we
sure.
competed,
Yeah.
yeah, against some of the big players. But
Yeah.
a couple of leaders came up to me after it, and they said, "Sue, you could never put this on your LinkedIn, but it's pretty amazing how we moved through that layoff and came out okay on the other side, and everybody understood why we had to do it, when we had to do it, and how people were treated." So that, I think, to me is always the learning lesson there is these are hard, but, push as much as you can to take care of the people that are leaving, and then
Yep.
also that the word I think that I see out in industry a lot, I wish there was a little bit better word, but the survivors. Make sure the
Sure.
survivors understand
Yep.
too the thoughtfulness that you put into that motion of the layoff
Yeah.
or the riff.
Yeah. It all ties it to that trust building. And Francis Frey's trust triangle of logic, authenticity, and empathy,
Yeah.
showing that we care. I really appreciate you bringing this example because layoffs and rifts are some of the hardest things. I've been on both ends of them. The timing question is one of the sticky ones. And the reality is there's no good time to get laid off. um, it always sucks. I remember one where I was chief of staff for an executive, and it was a smaller scale. It was an organizational riff, and we were lining up, and we had the plans in place, and a ton of care was going into this, and I think we had aligned the date just for quarter end for various reasons, and we caught it in time, but we realized that quarter end was October 31st, which meant, and we realized that meant that there was a chance that we were sending parents home to their kids' Halloween with that. And we made the decision that whatever the fiscal accounting for the quarter mattered less, we were going to adjust it by a day to think of that piece. One of the things that I observed, and you gave a couple of examples of either pushback or consideration or pieces. You talked about when you brought the execs in, there was feedback about the overall timing and wanting to move that piece. When I've also seen it in reluctance to do the full, like the generosity or even talk about and own a layoff. I tend to find that the connective tissue of that is the underlying fear and reluctance to feel emotional pain and discomfort themselves as leaders because it hurts, and that is expressed through logic and justifying and, oh, well, the timing's not good, or, oh, we just have to rip off the Band-Aid. But true, like, powerful culture that is based on trust isn't about not making the hard decision. It's about being able to sit with that discomfort and maturely and create that generosity where you can, that empathy where you can, and leave the space for people who are most impacted to have their experiences and to feel just let it suck. And the worst examples are where CEOs over empathize, which is not empathy, and make it all about their pain. I think I can remember a couple of Zoom firings in the pandemic where the CEOs were crying, and that's way missing the point.
One of the training deck that we put together and stuff, and I still have, some key components from that, and it was really training some of these managers that hadn't done it before. And one of the things is, I still to this day will say it. If you ask how, do you have any questions or are there any things I can follow up with? Take notes on that and stay true to that. And if you can stay true to that, then don't ask that
Yep.
question
That's a great, oh, wow. That's such important part of this.
because that's flipping the seat.
Yep.
Like, and that's the other thing is I'll always say when I prepare for these, I put myself in how would I want to be treated? And I
Yeah.
use that language with people very comfortably. I'll
Yeah.
just say I always think about how would I want to be treated?
Yeah.
These are hard things. And so I go, I filter it both ways. Yes, you have to do it, and that is part of leadership, the courage to make these hard decisions thoughtfully, and yes, also the responsibility of following up on things you said you would.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that sets us up very nicely for asking what your favorite decision story is. And I understand it's around learning to ask yourself a daily question. about how you treated people?
Yeah, so I still do it, and it came back in the under the leadership of Bob Mortensen and, the HP, and at the time, it was, always going into offices, but I literally, when I was walking out the door, I asked myself, "Did I treat everybody fairly and with respect?" And that was my gut check, and I recognized if I could say yes to those questions comfortably, I usually had people that didn't like me. And I early on had to get very comfortable with that. Because when you're making decisions that are fair and respectful, usually someone's not happy with the outcome. They're impacted by it. And I just had at a very early age had to get comfortable with that's what leadership is about. The courage to make those hard decisions, but they were fair for the balancing the business and what leadership needed in the business. And even though someone might not like it, I did it in the most respectful way that I could. They might not have felt that, but at some point you just have to say, I'm learning and growing too. I'll get better at this. But those were my markers early on, and they still are my markers today. And there were some days where I would go home as I was young and I would cry because they were hard decisions, but I didn't cry in the business. I cried on my personal time. And I always would tell people if it was a hard decision that impacted them, and I still do this today. I'll just say, I just want to know when I say I'm thinking about you, I will go home and I will think about you.
Yeah.
And I'll think about, is there anything I can do after this hard decision to support you in the future or what have you? So again, it's that consistency that only I can bring. Very early, I just developed that, and that still holds true to what I'm doing today.
Do you remember any days where you couldn't answer yes to both those questions? And what did you learn from those kind of experiences?
Yes, and there still are days like that.
Sure.
And what I usually do is I give myself grace,
Yeah.
and I realize that there's usually more growth. There is more growth for me,
Sure.
more awareness
Yeah.
and self-reflection.
Yeah.
And I would describe myself as a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
And I don't do it right. And
Hmm.
I think I'm very open with people. I have an executive coach, and
Yeah.
I'm a coach. There are days where I'm sure people don't feel like I handled it fairly and with respect. So I have to navigate through that or have a place where I can have those conversations and understand, how can I continue to develop as a leader and as an example.
One of the things that has kind of been a through line of all of this is we've talked about what it takes to build trust and build a culture of trust. And it's not just everyone feels like they like you. That there are hard decisions, whether it's heavy layoffs or whether it's smaller scale hard decisions, but the responsibility of leadership is the decision making. Something that occurs to me as you've been talking is a leader's emotional instinct may not be the North Star that aligns with that. Have you found that to be true? Not to ignore emotions, but the initial emotional response of avoiding pain or even asking someone in a situation of a layoff, is there anything else I could do for you? For many people, I found that that comes from, oh, I want to be able to help this person who is in pain, even if I'm not going to think through the logical I need to follow through with it. What have you learned over your career in terms of the balance between emotional gut instinct and clarity of decision and more structured
Let me
decision making?
let me know if this is answering it, but I think
Yeah.
what I continue to learn and develop is there's the objective business decisions that need to be made, and I'm there to do that with the business if it's aligned. And if I'm in the business, normally it is aligned. I'll opt out before that. And then making those hard decisions. And if someone is hurting from those, I'll still stay within those boundaries of I can only do so much, and there's a boundary there. But so I will offer up what feels authentic to me and right for that relationship. But I don't over skew and get personally involved.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate how you articulated out kind of the how of of thinking about that.
And I would say that's been a big learning for me more so almost with my change to consulting. I've been doing it now for 7 years, and I've really worked on that because I think when you're inside, you have a bit more emotional connection because you're there for the longer term when I was in-house. And with consulting, even though I do work with the leadership team, I'm just that much more removed, and I've had to learn how to navigate through those, boundaries and not get so maybe emotionally tied, knowing I'm not gonna be there for, 3, 4, 5 years. I'm gonna be there 6 to 12 months. And that's been learning for me. That's been growth for me of different boundaries that have to come into place and different courage that has to come, it has I'm there to make an impact pretty quickly,
Yep.
and, yeah, it's been growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you, speaking of your consulting practice, and we've of course talked about this a bit off the microphone. Through that learning, where do you find you bring the most value? Where do you have the most impact and effect that in areas that you like to that you want to work with people on?
This last year and this year, I've been, thinking quite a bit about my North Star that,
Yeah.
it's better leaders for a better world, and my thinking has been shaped because of some pro bono work I've done and then a book that I've read, and so I decided to kind of riff off of that, and I care deeply about, better leaders. I've been in business for a long time. I wanna transfer that knowledge, bring other people up as much as I can. So when I'm consulting, I have recognized, and I recognized this early on, that I will be able to do the work I wanna do if the opportunity comes from a CEO or a
Mhm.
board member or an investor.
Mhm.
And the reason I say that is because they see that something has to change. And not discounting, but there were a few HR leaders that reached out and I got into the conversations, but they didn't have the sponsorship. They
Right.
could see,
Yep.
but the sponsorship wasn't there yet. So I saw that after 3 years of I did a retro on what clients did I have, who brought me those clients, and there were only 2 that I didn't, move past the proposal on, and those were the 2 that came from HR leaders. And again, it wasn't their fault, it's just they just didn't have the, agency yet that was needed. So I love to go in when it is complex. It's usually maybe the leadership needs to be restructured because the business might be going in a different direction or it's a different stage in the business. There might be some culture not transformation, I would say renovation that needs to be done at that point in time. I find when you're doing that type of work, it's also an opportunity where you start to scale the importance of internal communications and processes like, is everybody informed? Is there transparency? Are we cascading? Those are a lot of the words that I bring and people start to use and adopt those patterns. And when you're moving fast, a lot of times in growth companies, they haven't had time to pause and say, oh gosh, those are new operating systems that we need in the business at this inflection point in the business. So they might seem straightforward, but for some, they just haven't had that cycle yet that those become the operating systems that are super important.
Yeah.
And the cross functional, breaking down the silos
Yep.
is also in. And again, it's just where people are at, and I'll say that
Yeah.
there's no fault, but
No,
let's
no, no.
bring some course correction in or some new ways of working into the business.
Yeah. Almost every situation that you described is a very normal course of a growing business. Things that work when information flow works at 5, 10, 15, 20 people because everyone's involved in everything. As you scale up past 40, 50, is certainly in the 60, 70, 80 range, and beyond. Things don't stop working because of malicious actors. Things stop working because that's just how human networks work. And intentional leaders are wise to bring you in to help craft those structures and systems, not burdened with a bureaucracy,
Right.
but to be intentional about what those systems are going to be.
Yeah. Can I share a fun story?
Please.
I was at a board meeting where I'm a board advisor, so I'm not a board member, but I'm in the boardroom and I know the team and it's amazing technology that's coming out. And I was talking to one of the latest hires that just moved here to California to work for this organization, and he was in doing research at a company, and he's perfect for this. And I said, I'm curious, now that you've been at this organization for 6 months, there was a board meeting yesterday. And so he was around. And I said, what are things that surprised you? One or two things that have surprised you, and a couple of things that, are a little bit different. And super insightful. I call these the old souls, very young in his career. He literally is leaving a research lab, and this is his first job. And he said, I love the Monday meetings that we have because we're all together in a room. And he said, I'm hearing how what I work on, I need to be aware of what other
Yep.
people are working on. And we have these meetings every Monday morning. And he said, we all work so closely together. And then I said, so, and what I'm hearing is the importance of collaboration and understanding that your work impacts others. And he said, yeah. And so, coming out of a research environment, this is new for me to so he was hitting on the key components, and he's super young in his career. And it was just so fun to hear that. But that comes from the leader at the top that's
Yeah.
setting the stage for the folks. And then his other insight was he said, yeah, I'm also learning that we have a product that we're going to market, and I'm used to researching and the curiosity. And he said, so I'm really learning a lot about prioritization and focus and teaching and he wasn't, you could tell he was internalizing that these were new muscles
Yeah.
he's developing because of it being in a very different role from
Yep.
research to putting a product to market. And it was really fun to hear that because it means the leadership is really aligned on those principles that I feel really make a difference in an organization.
I think you're doing it right as a leader if you have someone who says, "I love this meeting." Meeting culture goes the other way most of the time.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's really awesome. Sue, that's the top of the content. Are you ready for our lightning-ish round?
I sure am. I'll do
Uh,
my best that I can.
all right. That's all we ask here. Sue, what was your first job?
My first job was working for my parents. They bought a bookstore when I was in middle school. So I started working for them on Saturdays in the back room when I was about 12 or 13 years old, counting counting inventory as it came in.
I love it. Well, I'm gonna call an audible here. This is the ish of the lightning-ish part. What's something you learned there that still holds true for you in your current work?
I think I saw operations. Parents, it was their livelihood, so they had a high bar, under almost too high of a bar. I was expected to do things pretty perfectly. But the other thing is I think my dad had a model that he understood before there was Amazon. So there were certain things that he ordered in major bulk for the profit margin, and there were the books were not necessarily the profit margin. It was some of the curriculum that and I was responsible for unboxing truckloads of boxes that came in and counting it out and dispersing it to different clients. So
Oh, very cool.
I was able to start to develop those muscles of operations and precision, I guess, early.
Yeah. What's one leadership skill that you wish you'd learned earlier in your career?
I wish I would have found my voice a little bit earlier, confidently. I found my voice, but I think sometimes they were sidebar conversations.
Sure.
I wish I would have been more confident right away.
Yeah. What's the biggest myth about leadership that you've heard?
I will demyth by saying leadership is really hard. I don't know if people feel that it's easy. But I leadership is really hard. And I think the other thing is the thing I work on a lot is the difference between manager and leader, management and leadership. And so I'm not sure if those are myths or not, but I do believe we don't talk enough about the gaps. And we don't talk enough about leadership is really hard if you're doing it well.
I just had coffee with a roommate of mine from college. We were both in ROTC together. And first semester, freshman year, naval science class, the textbook was basically, I don't know if it was the literal title, but it was fundamentally the difference between management and leadership. And that was like the number one lesson as an 18-year-old NROTC midshipman. Um,
Wow.
we were comparing notes and how that has stayed true through our,
True. Yeah.
he's at NVIDIA now. And so, yeah. All right. What's the worst professional advice you've ever received?
I don't know if it came from a person, but if I had listened to it, I when I was 22, I was born and raised in Wisconsin, and I knew I wanted to come out to Silicon Valley. And my oldest brother said, "Why would you do that?" And so he was challenging, you know, why would you take that risk? And I did it, but I think if I had listened to that, things would have been very different for me.
My father was in the Navy also and was stationed briefly at Moffett Field for a training squadron for about 6 months. And famously in our family, he and my mom did not buy property in Silicon Valley in 1975 or 1976 because my dad's dad said, it's never going to go higher than this. So I'm glad that you did not listen to your brother's advice.
Yeah. Well, and advice that I would that I listen to on myself, and I always tell people not to, is I stepped out for 10, 11 years to raise our 3 boys, and when I stepped out, it was after the formative 10 years,
Yeah.
and I kinda stopped everything, and even at the time, a few people said, "Hey, Sue, would you wanna consult? We have some projects," and I said, "No," and I would not do that again, and I do tell that. I have a lot of women that come to me for mentorship because of I did come back into the work world and restart my career, but that's the one piece I always say, if I had hindsight, I woulda kept my, iron in the fire. It took me a lot longer and a lot more work to get back in when I wanted to get back in because I had really not, I was solely focused on our family and school and nonprofits.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing
So I
that.
gave myself some bad professional leadership advice.
We all figure things out as we go and with the best intentions. All right, last question. Not leadership or business related. What's a media recommendation? What do you listen to? What are you watching? What are you reading that you'd want to share?
I would say I read a lot of books. So a couple of books, there's like a thread that goes through my whole career. I would say that the two most recently that have made an impact on me are The Blue Sweater.
Okay.
And then the other one is Every Purchase Matters.
Okay.
I care deeply about global initiatives, and those are two books that it really have me thinking and thinking about priority of my time. And I call it, I think I might have shared with you, I call it my portfolio of impact of
Yep.
where I spend my time and stay very disciplined. And so I'm playing
Yeah.
around with those two books a lot. And then I would say most recently, we started watching the series The Madison.
Oh, I haven't watched it yet. Do you like it?
I am really enjoying it. I don't watch a whole lot of TV. I get
Yeah.
distracted pretty easily.
Sure.
But that one has got me. I'm into it, and it's only 6 seasons. That's probably, it's yeah. I
Oh, sure.
like the ones that are short.
Yes. Wonderful. And thank you so much. I will have to check that one out. I'll move it up the queue. Sue Olson is our global HR executive and fractional CHRO who partners with CEOs and boards to build people strategy for emerging growth companies at these critical inflection points that you heard us talking about. Sue, we'll have all this linked in the show notes, but where can people find you and where else do you want listeners to check you out?
Yeah, I'm always available if you're in the Bay Area for coffee, just hit me up. And then I do have a website, redthreadhr.com. It's a pretty light website, but if you're looking for me, LinkedIn is great. And then I just started a Substack about a month ago. I decided I wanted to do more of my what's in my head, get it on paper. So it's a new energizing challenge for me. Writing
I
is
love it.
not my first love, but a couple of people have encouraged me. But yeah, I'm really easy to get in touch with it. But I would say LinkedIn is probably the best. I do
Okay.
respond to those, and then yeah, email.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And we will make it easier for anyone to get in touch with you, finding all of this information in the notes. As always, follow, like, and subscribe to Bet on People on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And if you want to learn more about how we at Euda think about leadership, visit euda.io/executive coaching. I'm Keegan Evans, and here we bet on people.